Welcome back. In this second video, I'll be showing you how to use the step-by-step lesson plan portion of the Core Knowledge Teacher's Guides for the History and Geography curriculum. Now, if you haven't done so yet, be sure to watch the first video where we took a look at how to download the curriculum as well as the materials you'll be using. We also took a tour of the introduction section of the Teacher's Guide, which contains important information you'll need to teach the unit to your student. Now, before we start looking at the example chapter, a reminder that you can download the free daily work plans and other support materials from my website, homeschoolworkplans.com. And then the Core Knowledge curriculum is offered free by the Core Knowledge Foundation on their website, you can see here. And you'll be downloading the Teacher's Guide and the Student Reader from that website. And for some units, there will also be a timeline file in there as well. Now, specifically for this video, I'm going to be walking you through a chapter from the third grade unit on ancient Rome. However, all the Core Knowledge History and Geography teacher's guides are set up in basically the same way. So even if you're using a different grade level, you'll still be able to use the information in this video. Okay, so let's get started with our detailed walkthrough of an example chapter. So let's start by taking a look at the table of contents for this unit. Each history and geography teacher's guide consists of three main sections. There's an introduction, the step-by-step lesson plans, and then a set of teacher's resources in the back of the guide. We looked at the introduction in the previous video, so in this video, I'm going to be showing you an example chapter, as well as those teacher's resources, which include activities scheduled for the final days of the unit. Now, depending on the grade level, those are typically going to be some sort of assessment and then some specific activities to reinforce the content of the unit. We'll take a closer look at those end-of-unit activities later in this video. Okay, a quick note here. The history and geography curriculum is set up a bit differently than the language arts and science curriculums that Core Knowledge offers. So instead of lessons in the table of contents, you see here we have chapters. And this example unit contains 16 chapters, and those are generally going to be scheduled over 7 weeks or 35 school days. So each chapter is taught over 1 to 5 school days. Now, don't worry about needing to sort out which chapter gets taught on which day. I have all the units for the different grades planned out for you, and you can download that free daily schedule from my website so you'll know exactly what to do each school day. So for the example in this video, we're going to be looking at chapter 11 of this unit, which is titled The Buildings of Rome and is scheduled to be covered over 3 school days. So let's start by taking a look at that daily schedule I have on my website. As you can see here, you would be starting to teach chapter 11 on Wednesday of week 10 for 3rd grade. And right there you see the title of the lesson, The Buildings of Rome. You'll see a note that you'll be teaching the core lesson that day and that you'll be using the Teacher's Guide, or TG, chapter 11, and the Student Reader, or SR, chapter 11. Every new history and geography chapter starts with a page just like this one. So right up at the top under the chapter title, the big question for the chapter is listed. And in this case, the question we'll be looking at is, how was Rome similar to a modern city? Okay, next up, you'll see the primary focus objectives for this chapter. These are the main points your student will learn during the lesson. Now, you can go ahead and ignore those little numbers in red off to the side there, next to those objectives. Those refer to specific state standards a classroom teacher may need to align with or document. As homeschoolers, we typically don't need to worry about those state standards and alignment. Now, below that, you'll see a link for background information on this specific chapter. In earlier grades, this will typically be a paragraph or two giving you that orienting information so you can be in a better position to answer questions your student might have. In these later grades, so this is a 3rd grade unit, for example, you'll see there's a link there to the online resources website. Now, unless you are particularly familiar with the topics being taught this chapter, I would encourage you to take a few minutes, maybe the night before, and review this background information. Let's go ahead and take a look at that online resources website that's linked here. That website, along with this teacher's guide and the student reader for the unit, as well as the worksheets, are really the core material you'll be using to teach your student. And this resource website not only contains background information for you as the teacher, but this is also where many important supplemental resources used during the lessons reside as well. So I'll show you this website now, and we'll return to it later in this video to look at the lesson resources you'll also be using directly with your student. So clicking on that link in the teacher's guide is going to bring you to this website, the Core Knowledge, History, and Geography Online Resources. Now, to find the resource for a lesson, first you'll click on the title of the unit you're currently using, in this case, Ancient Rome. And then if we click in that red circle, we will bring up a PDF that looks like this. And then you would just click on the chapter you're using, in this case, Chapter 11. All right, that will bring us to this table, which lists all the resources for Chapter 11 for this unit. As you can see on the left, there is a page number for the teacher's guide listed. So those background information resources that were listed on page 85 of the teacher's guide that we were just looking at are right here. And in this case, clicking on this link will bring up a PDF file, and that will contain a couple of short pages of background information. I just took a screenshot to show you a sample here of what that sort of looks like. So moving back to the teacher's guide, let's look at that next section in the middle there for the core vocabulary for the chapter. Now, as I mentioned in the previous video, part of the core knowledge curriculum for language arts, science, as well as history and geography is building a student's vocabulary, and this is done in the context of the lessons. So learning vocabulary within the core knowledge curriculum is never about just memorizing words and definitions. Instead, we want our kids to learn the vocabulary in the context of the lessons. That's where it can be learned well with that rich information. So this information here is instead drawing your attention to two words that may be new to your student and will be introduced in the chapter. So you can be aware that you might need to explain these words further. So for this chapter, those two words are gladiator and marble. Now, you can see the definitions there for your reference, but you'll also see those words and definitions when you're reading aloud to your student from the student reader, and I'll be showing you that shortly. Okay, at the bottom of the page, you'll see the materials needed for this first part of the chapter, and that's some city photos you'll be accessing using that same online resources website I just showed you. All right, so jumping back to that online resources website for Chapter 11, you'll see those city photos here and a note about how to view them on the National Geographic website. Okay, a quick note. Core Knowledge does a pretty good job of keeping these links up to date. This is actually an amazing resource they put together. But sometimes a website, maybe like National Geographic, might move a page or a video. And so if you can, I do recommend trying to check these links the night before and make sure they're still working. They normally are. But if not, it might take you a few extra minutes to maybe do a quick search on the National Geographic website to find where the photos are now located. So like I said, that doesn't happen very often. It's not usually a problem. Almost always these links are up to date, and they're really sending you to these great resources that have already been found for you. And that saves us as homeschooling parents so much time and also brings this richness to help reinforce the content of the lessons. So this next page brings us to the core lesson for the chapter. And as you saw on the daily schedule, the Chapter 11 core lesson was scheduled for the first day this chapter is taught. And you'll see there that it's estimated this core lesson will take about 25 minutes. Now, quick note on that. These estimates are designed for classroom teachers. This entire curriculum was originally designed for classroom teachers. So while it varies depending on the type of activity, typically it will take a homeschooler less time to complete a lesson or activity simply because we're only working with one or two kids and not trying to corral a classroom of, say, 30 children. Everything takes longer when you have that many kids. Now, another quick note, core knowledge is what is known as a scripted curriculum. This means that every lesson across their language arts, their science curriculum, history and geography, it's all fully scripted. It's going to tell you step by step how to teach this lesson to your student. There is no guesswork needed here. If you're new to homeschooling and maybe you've been stressed out that you don't know enough about history or science or grammar to teach your student, these step-by-step instructions are there to guide you. You will not miss anything important as long as you're following these instructions. All right, so right at the top there, this lesson plan is going to guide you through introducing this chapter to your student. Now, you'll be prompted to review with them what they learned in the last few days about Roman infrastructure, including the infamous roads, bridges, and aqueducts. You'll then be prompted to show them the big question for this unit, which is both here in the teacher's guide as well as on the first page of the chapter in the student reader. And it's always there in the student reader on the first page of the chapter. There's even a support prompt here. If you're teaching a student who hasn't spent time in big cities or maybe doesn't see a lot of examples of big cities on TV or in books, there is guidance here about how to talk through some photographs of a big city and observe that there are some general themes, right? So big cities typically have tall buildings. They have traffic jammed roads. There tend to be a lot of people milling around. And then the introduction section finishes up by guiding you to tie the things that they know about big cities or are observing in these pictures with the reading for today. So encouraging them to keep an eye out in the reading for characteristics of the ancient city of Rome that are similar to big cities today. So right off the bat here, we're helping them tie what they know and what is familiar to them to the specifics of this history lesson. And then on the lower half of the page, we begin the guided reading support for this chapter of the student reader. So this is chapter 11, the buildings of Rome. Now you'll see right off the bat that the chapter is divided into sections of pages right there in the pink box. So this first section says A Visit to Rome, pages 62 to 64. And below that is notes on any core vocabulary located in that portion with instructions to scaffold understanding. And scaffolding understanding means that you might need to provide additional information to your students so they understand what's being talked about. So in this case, the concern is making sure that they understand what is meant by chariot races. Chariot races were really important in ancient Rome. And then the support for the reading section will also list different questions you can ask your student as you're reading, as well as key things in the reader to point out. So as you can see, it's guiding you through, right? You don't need to necessarily know a lot about this topic in advance. It's going to help you provide that support to your students so they get as much as they can out of the reading for this lesson. Okay, so let's go ahead and flip to the next page of the student reader so we can look more carefully at one of these support sections. All right, so let's take a look at this section of this next page. And I've kind of blown this up here so you can hopefully read it. When we see this up close, there are different types of support laid out for the section of the reader. So this is the next section. It's the Temple of Jupiter and the Marketplace, two sections in the reader, and they're on pages 64 and 65. Now, keep in mind, there are only three of these sections in the student guide for this chapter. It's really not a very long chapter. In the student reader, you're only going to be reading aloud to your student 5 or 6 pages, and that includes a lot of pictures. So these support sections generally cover about 2 pages each. All right, so first off at the top, you see those subtitles of the 2 sections you'll be reading on those pages. And then on the left-hand side is a picture of one of those pages. And this is just there to orient you so you don't get mixed up on which pages you're reading in the student reader and which pages you're looking at in the teacher's guide. All right, so looking at this section, the instructions are to read the 2 sections to the student and then use the information to help support their understanding. So the first support is the core vocabulary, where there is guidance for helping a student understand what marble is and how it was used to build the Temple of Jupiter. And then next up, this section guides you to ask your student a couple of questions once they finish reading the sections. And a quick note here, you'll see the questions labeled by type. So things like literal questions, evaluative questions, and there's also inferential questions elsewhere in this chapter. Now, you can ignore these labels. These are there to help, again, guide a classroom teacher who needs to align their lessons to state standards. As homeschoolers, we can simply work through these questions with our student, and you can see right there under each question is the answer. So you'll have more information to help support your student if they need it. Okay, so just stepping back for a moment, this guided reading section of this chapter is 3 pages long, so it's pretty short. You'll just work through each section in the teacher's guide here, reading that portion of the student reader to your student or having them read it to you, and then pointing out the vocabulary words and asking the questions as you go. That's really it. I know it seems a little complicated, but that's really all you're doing. All right, and then once the core reading is done, you'll move on to this final section of the core lesson, and that's checking for understanding. Now, there are several ideas here for how to wrap up the lesson, and you can choose 1, 2, or all of them depending on how much reinforcement your student needs. Also, again, since these sections are usually more efficient working with 1 or 2 students, I actually try to use all the wrap-up activities with my own kids because they're really short. They usually only take maybe a minute or 2 apiece. So in this case, there's a prompt to revisit the big question. How was Rome similar to a modern city? And there's some notes there on connections you can help your student make if needed. There's also a prompt to choose one of the vocabulary words, maybe gladiator or marble, and come up with a sentence or 2 using that word. Okay, so that's it for the core lesson that was scheduled for that Wednesday I showed you on the schedule. But a quick reminder, this chapter actually contains several days of lessons. So let's jump back to the daily schedule and take a peek at how the other lesson days for this chapter work. All right, so here we've completed the core lesson scheduled for Wednesday, and that brings us to Thursday. So for Thursday, we're still on Chapter 11 in the Teacher's Guide, as you can see here, and we'll be using an additional activity entitled Visit the Pantheon. All right, so we're jumping back to the teacher's manual. This is the same page where we just finished up the core lesson for the previous day, and you'll find that the additional activity of visiting the Pantheon scheduled for this day is right here at the start of the additional activities for this chapter. So let's take a closer look at this one. Okay, so this activity is an example of an art history lesson. Now, we talked about these art history lessons briefly in the first video, but as a reminder, these activities involve showing a piece of art, or in this case, a famous building, to the student and guiding them through looking at it carefully, asking them questions, and so on. So you'll see up top that you have 2 options here for doing this activity. The first one is the free option. The picture you need for this lesson is linked on that online resources website, and you find it the same way you did for the background resources we looked at earlier. So if you click on the link, you click on the name of the unit, you click on the chapter, and you'll see the Wonders of the World database link. And then clicking on that, you'll be taken to a PBS website with pictures of the Pantheon. So there are just some samples there. All right, the second option is that you can buy an art pack directly from Core Knowledge, which you could do on their website. Now, the art pack includes high-quality color photos on cardstock of all of the pieces of art taught in a particular grade level. So just this one set of cardstock art pieces. And there's generally 15 to 30 of them in the pack, depending on how many are being taught in the grade level. Now, I do have some of these sets. They're really nice. They're much easier to take pictures of on Instagram than a tablet screen. So I do have them so I can show everybody. They even have, if you flip them over, there are even questions on the back to ask your student. They're really nice. But I'm going to tell you, you do not need these. If you want to buy them, great, but you don't need them. You can always use this free option of using the link to view the piece of art on the internet. And if you don't love the particular image in the link, you can always Google that piece of art, or in this case, the Pantheon, and you'll find many pictures. There's nothing rare, right, about any of this information that Core Knowledge is teaching. The whole point of the curriculum is to give your child a solid base of culturally significant knowledge. And so all of these works of art, these buildings that they're being taught in these chapters, these are all things where there are plenty of pictures on the internet. Okay. Now, off to the side there in this teacher's manual, you'll see a prompt that for this activity, you'll be using activity page 11.1. And remember, you could always find the activity pages for a unit in the back of the teacher's guide. They're always in the same place, thankfully. Now, if you downloaded the free organization and prep documents from my website, you'll have seen the prompt to try and print all these activity pages at the beginning of the unit or even the beginning of the school year so you have them handy. I am all about trying to be as organized as we can so our school days are as short and efficient as possible. All right, so I'll just put this picture of this activity page up here so you can see it. It's over there on the right-hand side. And then during the instructions for the lesson, you'll be prompted at the end to have your student work through labeling the different parts of the Pantheon. So you'll have gone through and looked at pictures of the Pantheon. You'll have gone through a whole series of questions within the teacher's guide, going back and forth with your student, talking about the different architectural features. And then the last thing they'll do is take this activity sheet and they'll label the different architectural features. Okay. So you'll find the instructions, like I said, for going through this activity here on the next page. So I mentioned that if you buy the art cards, they have questions on the back. You don't need to even worry about that. If you go ahead and just find pictures on the internet or use the links that Core Knowledge provides on the online resources website, all the questions you need to ask your student are here in the teacher's guide. All right. So up first, it prompts you to show the student a picture of the Pantheon at dawn. So that sounds exciting. That picture is also linked on the online resources website. So here's some pictures to give you an idea. These are just screenshots of some of these things that were linked on the online resources website. So you'll be talking through about the architecture, including the pillars. You'll also be prompted for this image, to show them this image of the Pantheon Dome, and so on. And just like the core lesson we walk through, the teacher's guide's really just taking you through this step by step, point out different things to your student, what questions to ask, and so on. Many of these art history lessons also include links to brief YouTube videos. So in this case, there's like a 2-minute video you'll watch is there of a historian talking about, usually on site, talking about a particular piece of art or a particular building. And then, like I said, at the end of the instructions, you'll get all the way through this, and you'll use that activity page to kind of prop up that understanding and reinforce what was learned about the different architectural components of the building. All right. So that's it for that activity scheduled for that second school day. That activity will probably take you just about as long as reading the chapter did the previous day. Okay, so let's jump back to the daily schedule and we'll look at what's scheduled for the third and final school day we're spending on this chapter. So for the last day of this chapter, we have scheduled on Monday of that following week. And as you can see here, we're going to be using 2 additional activities for Chapter 11 of the Teacher's Guide. So instead of one longer lesson or activity like we did the first 2 days, where we read a chapter one day and then took a pretty detailed tour of the Pantheon the second day, this final day has 2 shorter activities scheduled. So the first one is titled, What Did the Forum Look Like? And the second is the vocabulary worksheet for chapters 8 through 11. So first up, we have this activity to learn about the famous Roman Forum. And this is just in the same section we found the last activity. There's an additional activities section for this chapter. So similar to the activity from the day before, we looked at the Pantheon in detail. Today's activity, you'll be accessing a photograph and an animation video on YouTube to learn about the forum. And as you can see, these are brief instructions for this one. So you'll be accessing those 2 resources from the online resources website, taking some time to explore them, and then talking with your student about the animation, which presents a possibility of what the forum looked like back during the days of the Roman Empire. It's pretty cool. And then for the second activity on this final school day for this chapter, you'll be using activity page 11.2 so your student can review the vocabulary they've learned during the unit for chapters 8 through 11. And again, this activity page is just found in the back of the teacher's guide. The answer key is there as well. All right, so that brings us to the end of chapter 11, which is taught over 3 school days. So you just saw what you'll be doing with your student over 3 separate school days. Now, before we finish up though, I want to show you 2 things, and I'll keep this brief. First, what's located in the teacher's resources in the back of the teacher's guide, because you're going to need those materials. And second, I want to show you the assessment and activity days that are scheduled for the end of each unit so you can understand how those will flow and where to find the materials. Okay, so here is the table of contents for the teacher's resources section in the back of the teacher's guide. This is where you're going to find all the activity pages as well as the answer key. There's also a list of fiction and nonfiction excerpts that are used during the lessons, but I will tell you that if you're following the lessons step by step, you don't need that list, and you really don't need a list of the activity pages either, because all of those are called out specifically in the lessons. And so you'll always know in a lesson what activity you'll be working on or what fiction or nonfiction excerpt you might be reading, something like that. All right. And then finally, this is where you find all the instructions and documents for the end of unit assessment as well as the activity. So let's just take a quick look at those items. So if you're using the daily schedule from my website, you'll see that several days at the end of each unit are scheduled for assessment and end of unit activities. Now, this looks a little different depending on the grade level, but regardless of which grade you're teaching, all the instructions and documents you'll need will always be in the back of this teacher resources section. So for kindergarten through second grade, there is a simple domain assessment that you'll use as your only activity for a school day. And again, that'll just be listed on that schedule you downloaded from my website. It'll say, unit assessment. And I do want to reassure you here, there is nothing scary about the unit assessment. I think sometimes the word assessment with young kids sounds scary, especially if you're new to homeschooling or if you're using a curriculum that doesn't do a lot of assessment type activities. Really, these assessments are well designed, they're age appropriate. Generally, it's just going over questions and getting a feel for what material your student retained and maybe what they didn't quite catch on to in the unit. Then the following 2 days are set aside for culminating activities, and you will find the instructions for each of those days in the teacher resources section here. So for those younger kids, for example, a common activity on day 1 is to make some sort of mural or art project related to the unit. And then on day 2, typically they make like a little booklet of the things that they learned during the unit. So it's fun stuff. It's just fun activities to finish out the unit and kind of reinforce what they learned. All right, for third grade and up, there is also always a day set aside on the schedule for the domain assessment. And again, nothing scary. It's typically multiple choice, some matching questions, just going over specific things that they would have learned in the domain, as well as vocabulary that was covered. And then a day is also generally set aside for performance task activity. And again, the instructions and the documents you'll need for that are always found in this teacher's resources section. All right, so that concludes the detailed tour of the step-by-step lesson plans for the chapter, as well as a quick overview of those assessment and activity days at the end of each unit. Okay, quick couple things before you go. First, remember that all core knowledge, history, and geography teacher's guides are laid out in basically the same way. So I know there's a lot of information in this video, but all the lessons look basically like this. So now that you've gotten a feel for how to navigate through a chapter, you'll be in a good position to teach this subject to your student using this curriculum. Also, please be sure to download the organization and preparation documents from my website. They're free resources. I have done all this organization and scheduling work for you, and the daily schedule will tell you what to work on each day, and the organization documents will give you a checklist of what to print, what supplies you'll need, even when you'll need like a library book during a unit. I'd much rather you know in advance what you need so that you can be prepared each day. All right, so that's it for this video. Best wishes on your homeschooling journey.